And just gonna get my transcript. Okay. Hey. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. This session is actually part of a subject called Crunch, which is part of the Graduate Certificate in Learning Design course held at UTS. So very excited to have everyone here. Welcome to students and students of Crunch, as well as everyone else here who is interested in this space of learning analytics. We're very excited to have here with us Dr. Gloria Fernandez-Nieto, who has kindly agreed to take this time out of her busy schedule to share about her work in multimodal learning analytics and talk about the ethical and learning design considerations in this space. So here's just a fun connection. Gloria was actually a graduate of UTS, having completed her PhD at UTS. So we're very happy to have her back. So I'm going to let her start now. But basically what will happen is during this session is that Gloria will be sharing about her work for about 30 minutes. And then after that, we will open the time for Q&A. But please don't wait until then to think of questions, and just drop your questions into the chat, and then we will pick them up during Q&A time. Okay, so just to let you know, this session is being recorded. So if feel free to keep your microphone and video off if you're not comfortable. Okay, so over to you now, Gloria.
Thank you, Lisa. Can I just share my screen? Thank you. I hope everyone can see my screen now. Yeah, cool. First of all, thank you so much to Lisa for the great invitation. It's a pleasure to be here sharing some of our research. As Lisa already mentioned, this is a collaboration between UTS and Monash. Back when I started at UTS, Roberto was here, so we work on this. I will talk about this later. I will frame the discussion today about a paper that was published last year about lessons learned about multimodal learning analytics in the wild. And I guess most of the things I'm going to be mentioning today are about that paper. I tried to focus this on the ethical and learning design considerations because Lisa kindly reminded me that the session wants to explore this a bit more. So we will be talking about learning design and ethical considerations on multimodal learning analytics in the wild. To give you a little bit of a context as well, I would like to mention that, of course, this is not something that I did on my own. This is a team effort, and these are some of the fantastic people working on this research. You probably are familiar with some of these faces. Well, Simon is here, so you probably may know Simon. But we have others. Roberto, as I mentioned, we started this research because he sort of promoted this investigation for many years. Vanessa, we also have Jimmy, Rio, Lin Xuan, Dragan here at Monash have been working on this. So this is just to mention that it's a team effort, and all the different research I've been discussing in here is part of this effort. And this is just a timeline also probably for everyone to get context on how this project has been developed in the years. And also probably to get to know a bit more about the complexities of working, doing human-centered design approaches, which I personally love them, and that's part of the research that I'm having here in my research. But it's not easy. So you may probably notice because of the time that we have been spending on this research. So I'm not sure if you are seeing my pointer. Hopefully you are doing. So back in 2017, Roberto was working at the UTS. Thanks for that thumbs up. So we started this project. So Roberto was empowering teachers to learn more about learning analytics and learning design. And then he teamed with Vanessa, who started her PhD back in 2017, and they collaborated and work on very interesting approaches, exploring how sensor data can be used to inform learning in physical settings. And then I suddenly appear here in the picture back in 2019 when I was doing my PhD there at UTS. So we continue this research, but this time we were generating visualizations, something we call high fidelity prototypes that users can interact with. And we were testing this with the teachers and with the students and with other researchers. So we iterated this, and probably this brings us to 2020, where the actual, I moved to Monash, Roberto was in Monash at that time, and Vanessa was also there. And they were working in a teamwork analytics research, big grant that Roberto was handling. And this project actually published the lessons learned in 2023. I was mentioned this at the very beginning. So I've been focusing the talk on this paper, which are these lessons learned. So I will be talking about the lessons learned during this whole process, but particularly the paper talks about how the different tools that we develop are being using in the wild, meaning that teachers are actually using it as part of the classroom setting. So that's going to be the main focus. And that, of course, brings us today, where I have the chance to talk about this today in this talk. Also, to give you a little bit of a context, I guess I need to explain the educational setting we are normally dealing with. So this is how it looks for our research almost every day. So we work in the nursing simulation, and you can see in here there are different stakeholders. So we have students who are performing certain roles during the scenario. It's a simulation guard nurse scenario. We have different mannequins, and this is just one example of the simulations that we have conducted. This is actually the last one, but we have had other sort of simulations as part of the whole research. You may also see that sometimes teachers are part of the simulation, and we are also interested on analyzing this type of data, how teachers, for example, can co-teach with others, and we are collecting multiple data to do this. So I may probably need to explain the multimodal learning analytics a little bit in here, and I'm going to use the picture to illustrate why multimodal. So as you can see, we are using multiple sensors. So in this example, we are using microphones. So the nurses are using microphones. We are also using indoor positioning trackers, and they are using these belly bags, and as you can see in the image. As well, we're using physiological Fitbits. So they are using some watches, and we are monitoring certain things about their stress levels and things like that. And we are also video recording normally the simulation. So it's multimodal because we are collecting multiple traces from students. So we wanted to make our tools a bit more rich in terms of the different traces from learning that we can capture, and that's why we are collecting all of these different modalities. Then the focus in the learning analytics for multimodal learning analytics is to make sense of all these data in terms of learning and teaching. So that's pretty much what we have been focused on. It's trying to make sense of these raw data and trying to translate these raw data into something that is useful for teachers and students. But yeah, this is mostly for contextualizing you. Then going already to the lessons learned paper, and something that is highlighted there is probably a couple of challenges. including that, and this is not just for multimodal learning analytics, this is for other learning analytics tools and approaches. So the systematic literature reviews and many other papers are highlighting that there's misalignment between the technology that we are using and the actual learning design. And this is real, and this is documented, and this is still the current situation. So there's a lot of space for research in this area on how are we actually using this data to really inform what are the learning objectives of the course, or particular tools that are actually informing students and to make decisions for their learning, as well as teachers, probably to validate the way to intervene with students and things like that. So there's still a lot of misalignment between the technology and the learning design. Then, of course, the second challenge that we are facing now in learning analytics are the ethical considerations, because there's many concerns in terms of the use of learning analytics to support education. I will talk about this a bit more. So I already mentioned the devices that we are using, but I guess this is important because we are going to be discussing about the ethical concerns and considerations. And I guess the best way to understand those considerations are having the big picture. So you already see that it can be very intrusive. We are actually using devices to collect data. Our students are wearing microphones, they are wearing indoor positioning data. So of course, the ethical consideration is big. So I will talk about, and probably we can have a discussion at the very end about these lessons learned on how having this human-centered design will help to actually build tools that are really supporting this learning and teaching. And also to build trust on these users to wear these devices and actually believe on the data they are seeing every single day. So in terms of the challenges that I'm going to try to, later in the lessons learned, I try to map it between ethical and learning design challenges. I found that very difficult because I found some of them are actually talking about both things, ethical and learning design considerations, but we can talk about this at the end, and you can give me your impressions about the way I'm organizing the presentation today. But yeah, so as I just mentioned, we identify a couple of logistical aspects that are a bit challenging. This is something in the wild. So we are expecting this to be used in every single class that a teacher is given. So the way it is working at the moment, it still needs a researcher there helping the students to wear the devices and explaining how to use them properly and things like that. And because we actually observe that things may happen in the wild, a student can be doing what it's supposed to do. In this case, a nurse is actually going to see how the patient is and is moving the devices, particularly for the localization sensor. We have big issues with that one because our students tend to move the tracker to one side to another, which is very common, and it's the way it should be. They are doing something, they are dealing with the patient, and it's just okay that they move it because they need to be comfortable to complete the task. However, that was affecting our data collection, and sometimes we needed to deal with this messy data. And we have some alternatives to actually identify those moments where the technology was not capturing the things as it was supposed to be captured. But at the end, we find a way to do it, but there's still a lot of space to keep working on how to deal with these challenges. Also, probably something interesting to mention, we were using these devices. These are Empathicas, and these are like Fitbits that students were wearing during the sessions. And they were really useful when they have control scenarios, like when we invite 4 students and we ask them to wear the watch, they work fantastic. But then when we move into wild, it was a mess. the technology actually didn't work and we decided not to use it. So it's been very complicated to use these sort of devices in the wild. We're still exploring how we can use it because we reckon this information can be very informative in terms of how students are dealing with very complex situations, such as managing stress levels and things like that. However, as I just mentioned, collecting this information can be very, very complex in the wild. Privacy challenges, of course, and this is also documented in the literature. As I just mentioned, our students are wearing microphones, and they have mentioned that it's very sort of strange for them to be recorded during their actual performing of the task. I will share the lessons learned about this, but there's still discussions that needs to happen in terms of the use of technology and how effective or useful are these devices for the teaching and learning processes that we would like to improve. In the same way, I just mentioned the localization is also something tricky to use. You know, we are collecting data where the students are. And sometimes they need to go to the bathroom, for instance. So we are capturing this data, and that can be very, very tricky in terms of privacy issues. And this is also something to highlight, and is in terms of the technology readiness. So I just mentioned the case of the Empathica bracelets that we were not able to use in the wild. So some of the devices may be useful for control scenarios, but if you wanted to use something in the wild, you may need to double check that the data is collected in the way it should be collected. And if noises are being captured, you may need to deal with them, and you need to probably co-design how to solve these issues with teachers and students to probably conciliate on a solution on how this can be fixed. Of course, and I guess this is like the main conclusion in terms of what the literature is highlighting at the moment is the misalignment that I mentioned at the very beginning between the multimodal learning analytics innovations and the learning design. One of the alternatives that we found that will help to provide a connection between these tools and the actual learning design is the use of some co-design practices or participatory design practices in a way that will help us to understand the context of the situation. Also, teachers will let us know about the needs and what they really want to know from the data we are capturing. So the main lesson learned, at least from me, from all these years in this project, is having the voices in the loop. It's really helpful to try to close this gap. That helped us a lot. And of course, all the different considerations in terms of ethical consideration, privacy considerations. So there is plenty of room for discussions, and we as learning designers and learning analytic researchers, we may need to keep talking. This is a multidisciplinary work that needs to be improved in the future. There's still a lot of space for research in this area. And I guess also talking about privacy, and I just mentioned this, there's some mentionings in the literature in terms of how we are tracking children's. So I have seen a lot of learning analytic happening in schools, and we are now tracking students. Again, this in terms of privacy, there's a big consideration that we may need to deal in here. We haven't, for this research, we haven't actually collect data from children. Our main focus has been university students. However, they have mentioned some concerns in terms of these privacy information. So again, there's a lot of space, and we may need still to keep the discussion open to solve all of these privacy issues that we are facing at the moment. In addition of also talking about the privacy challenges, we identified that we regularly ask for students to sign the consent forms, and that's the regular practice that we all should have. However, we notice there's a gap in the literature because although we know everyone asks for consent, no one is reporting properly the strategies that they are using for asking for consent. I have heard from some colleagues that they still struggle on how to ask for the consent form from students, especially if they are doing things in the wild. But if you check in the literature, there's still like few researchers that are reporting on this, so you still don't know how or what would be the best practice or how you can address these sort of complications. So this is probably a call for researchers to also indicate properly how the consent form is being asked to students and teachers, because this will help to inform others and the community, and probably at some point we will find the best practices on how to do it, and we can implement these in a scalable way. But there's still a gap in there on how can we ask for consent in the proper way. Part of the ethical challenges include that we're actually, there's a lot of potential for biases in the analytics that we are showing to students. And I would like probably to mention that I'm an engineer, and I personally like fancy and beautiful visualizations. I really like them, but we may need to consider how helpful and how informative these visualizations can be for our students or for teachers. Also trying to understand how they make sense of these tools is also or can be informative for the things we are actually creating, because we have noticed in some of the studies that we have conducted that we have very complex visualizations that students and teachers don't know how to interpret. And that could be very critical for learning, because maybe they will interpret it in the wrong way, and we don't want that. We are trying to communicate things to inform, but to inform them well. What if we are actually causing things that are affecting their path in terms of learning and teaching? Of course, we have also noticed some cognitive dissonances from what we are showing to students and what they are interpreting. We have some cases where students were facing the visualization, they noticed they did something wrong, but they still believe that was not correct. They probably that was also part of the trust concern that we are facing at this time. Although they were seeing and facing that in the dashboard, they were still believing that what they did was correct. Yeah, that's only one of the probably one of the experiences I would like to share here. Then also, and also referring to the same aspect, which is ethics and how we are using these dashboards and the information we are created. This also has to be with the models that we are using. We are working on learning analytics, so we are using data, we are doing some analysis, or we're running some models, and we are generating support or feedback for students. We may need to check on the level of accuracy of these models that we are using, because they can be misinforming the practice. So every time someone is attempting a new model, it needs to be sure that the model is actually displaying what needs to be displayed. And we also will encourage that it needs to be evaluated with the actual stakeholders before using in real life. So you may have a couple of sessions with teachers, students, probably showcase what are the results and try to make sense of the model's outcomes together with students and teachers to double check that they are actually working as they are supposed to be working. I like this image, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I don't think we should aim for perfection, like 100% perfect models. What we may need to check are for useful models, what are really informing the practices and what are those models or dashboards that are actually giving sense to the learning and the teaching process. In the same way, when you are working in complex scenarios like we are, because learning is quite complex and it's very hard to know when someone is learning or not. So it actually increases the challenges for us as researchers, designers, because we may need to consider many things. And that's why we're hopefully having the human in the loop will help us to understand better the context and to provide better outcomes for them, because they are the end users at the end of the day. Um, Challenges in terms of trust, of course. If the models are not working, well, probably students and teachers will start doubting about the effectiveness of the dashboards that we are showcasing. So it's always good to test everything that you are using in the wild, particularly. That's why we spend like many years testing our prototypes first, trying to make sense of the data, then trying to understand that this is actually making sense for those who are using it. And once it makes sense for them, we include that as part of the learning design. So now, and I'm going to show you later, now the dashboard is something teachers are using to inform the debrief, but it's not from the blue. It's coming from a very long process of interactions with researchers, teachers, and students. So probably I'm talking about a lot about the stakeholders, but most of my of my talk today is focusing on the human-centered design, and that's why I'm always mentioning that humans needs to be there. So that's why I'm probably being like talking too much about stakeholders, but they are really important as part of the whole process. So let's talk about the study, and then I will jump into the lessons learned about this research. So I already mentioned that we are collecting data from different devices. We are collecting data from students, teachers, and teachers. But the collaboration has been with students, teachers, and researchers. When I mean we are collaborating with them, we have sessions with students, we have sessions with teachers where we sit with them and they have the chance to have a look at the results. They actually criticize our results and they are always challenging us to check that what we are displaying is useful for students and teachers. So this collaboration, it's very, very helpful in order to inform your final learning designs and your final learning analytic tools designs. So I've been talking a lot about what's the setting and what are the challenges from the literature. This is actually what we have been doing as a multimodal learning analytic tool. So this is one of the examples that we published in LAC last year. And this is very, and this particularly important. This was sort of the one closing my PhD there at UTS. So we created an editor for teachers in a way that they were able to guide the analysis. So they have an editor, and the editor is something very, very simple. Oh, sorry. So this is the editor. You may see there's like a form where teachers can actually try to prompt what they really want to see as part of the visualization. So I tested these visualizations with teachers at the UTS and Monash. That collaboration ended up with some interesting results that are published in this LAC paper. Some of the visualizations are timelines like this one, where we can see every single participant, meaning that this is, for instance, one of the students, this is another student, and they can see every single activity that they have performed during the simulation session. And the tool is highlighting particular errors that they may have made. These errors are actually coming from the teacher. So by using this editor, the teacher can guide the analysis of the multimodal data And we are generating these visualizations in real time for them to have a look how well these students perform. And this is just one example. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I was focused on indoor positioning data, and this is one of the examples of the visualizations that we can create. So these are ego networks, and this is using most of the social network analysis that probably you all are familiar with. So we were looking for teamwork instances during the whole simulations. So teachers particularly wanted to see when there are critical situations in the simulation, let's say the patient was having a heart attack, they wanted to see how well students were working as a team. So they choose certain phases or moments during the simulation, and they wanted to see how close they were working together or how they divided the task efforts, if they were to particular beds, or if they all of them were in the same bed and probably all the other patients were there also needing them, but all of them were in the critical bed. So they teachers wanted to see all of these because they wanted to have these sort of discussions with students while they were in the debriefing session, as well as the errors and things they were doing during the whole simulation, also to see if they were reacting properly to certain events during the simulation, or if they were missing important things that they can actually talk about during the debrief session. So these are just examples of the dashboards that we created, but I guess the main dashboard that was presented in the lessons learned paper is this one that you are all seeing at the moment. So this is one of the educators there. This is at Monash. And teachers are already using these dashboards in the wild, and they are guiding the debrief session by using these specific visualizations. But again, this is coming from an effort of different iterations with them, with students, and finally they are now using it as part of the classroom. So this is one of the activities they normally perform at the very end. They complete the simulation, and at the end of the session, they talk about things that went well and things that probably can be improved. And they are using these dashboards to inform all the scenarios. This is how it looks like, so they can see where students spend most of the time. They have also some information about the type of discussions that we're having in those critical moments, for instance. So we learn many things, and I guess I just want to check about the time. I still have time, cool. So I think I've been mentioned some of the lessons learned while I was talking about the challenges. So I'm gonna try to be brief with these lessons learned. So of course we learned that intrusiveness of sensors may be a concern for teachers and students. However, most of them mention that they feel comfortable by wearing these devices because they are using them only in the classroom, and also because they know these can be useful for the learning process that they are completing. So they would like to know if they made errors, they would like to know how well they did, so they are willing to wear the sensors, and that was one of the lessons learned. And this is one case, while we, I think this one was last year, no, 2 years ago. So you remember COVID happens, and of course, doing multimodal in the wild was a bit complex. But we implemented a system where we clean everything, all the devices were clean, and they can wear like trusting in the device. But some of them were concerned about how clean are these devices. And this is something I would like just to share. We have learned that technology probably is not that ready yet, because some of us researchers needs to be there in the classroom to organize the whole setting. So we are aiming to have something where when teachers can actually use it and start, and also students can wear sensors or one single bracelet and they can start without much preparation. but that's still in progress. Of course, there's unexpected technical issues. Something may happen and some of the data may be missed. So you may need to be prepared for that, and you may need to discuss with teachers and students on what would be the best solution when data is missing. Shall we simply avoid displaying this data, or shall we try to complete this data to at least show something? That's like a very critical discussion to have, because this may happen, technology may fail. And also there are trade-offs. Maybe the data is not complete, but you can still have some information you still want it, or simply we avoid that sort of information. The first one I have in here, the purpose of capturing multimodal data. I think this one is important, and this refers to informing teachers and students about what's the purpose of this data collection. So you may need to talk to them and explain this is being collected so that you can reflect on what you did. And they really appreciate that if this is going to be used for my learning practice, I really wanted to be part of this, but you really need to explain. Otherwise, probably they won't trust about it. We learned that there could be some issues when you are visualizing these. So some of them may be interpreting the data in the wrong way. But this is not the students or the teacher's fault. It is the fault of the design of the different tools you are implementing. So you may need to concentrate on how well you are designing this so that everyone can make sense, interpret, and know about the context and things like that. So I reckon this last one is where having the voices from students and teachers help the most, because you will actually evaluate the different visualization. But these may need to come from them, because maybe you can understand them as a researcher, but students are simply wanted to understand if they did well or not. So the information needs to be communicated in a very proper way. We learned that human-centered design is important because we can hear their voices. Listen to teachers' voices is important because they have some pedagogical intentions that want to achieve during the simulations, and they would like to be able to discuss about them. And the only way to do it is by using useful and informative information that it's normally displayed in the dashboards. So I guess this is not supposed to be there. I'm so sorry because of that. So we also learned that we may need, remember we mentioned something about consent forms. So it's always good to keep updating the strategies that you're using for the consent forms. We have some messages from teachers, and they were actually recommending us to reduce the amount of words we were using for the consent form, because they want something simple to communicate to students what this is for, why this is useful. And we have these long consent forms and explanatory statements, and students don't normally read them. So they were suggesting probably we can have smaller consent forms or shorter consent forms to inform better students. We of course we learned that a multimodal learning analytic can be very useful in the classroom. It's not easy to be deployed, but it can be very useful, and we believe there's a lot of space for research in this area. So I guess I just finished my talk in here with just one invitation. There's a multimodal learning analytics workshop happening in the context of the AIED conference this year. If you have any work that you would like to submit, it's very welcome. Please do it. I can give more information if anyone would like to have this information. Yeah, so thank you so much for being and attending this talk. It's amazing again to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so
I
much,
think we
Laura.
have time for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. That was so nice and really good. And we have a whole bunch of questions. And I can see just looking at the chat, some of these questions are a little bit related. So, and I'm just going to try and see if I can bunch them together. So I guess the very first question that was raised, we might have answered that already. So that question about compliance. So from what we are hearing from you, it seems that as long as you have communicated to the students the purpose of all this in the service of their learning, the students were quite on board, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's impressive. When
Yeah.
they know the type of visualizations they can see and how they can inform their actions, they are willing to wear the devices, to be part of the study. Yes.
That's so important because so basically, and it comes back to kind of like what we were studying about for crunch students. We were looking at the just collecting data just because it's there, but we can see that people will benefit from knowing what is the value of this exercise for them. So yeah, thank you for that. And we have another some questions on really like the technologies and how they were piloted and what you found and how this informed the practice. So one of these questions is like, did you actually pilot these technologies and how did the live results differ from the pilot results?
When you said pilot is like we conducted
Yeah,
previous.
like I think you were
Yeah.
saying that you actually tested it out with the educators beforehand, had a look, and then after that you implemented it sort of more fully. So yeah, did the live results differ from the pilot explorations?
Yes, yes. As I mentioned, some of the lessons learned are that in the wild settings are actually very complex because things may happen. So when you are doing this in a control setting, you ask participants to behave in a certain way. You can tell them, please don't move this tracker because this tracker needs to be pointing or facing this way. When they are doing something in the wild, that's very complicated because they are simply working on their
Yeah,
task. You cannot tell them, stop attending the patient because you need to do this now.
that's right. Yeah. So the technology cannot get in the way of their learning in the actual situation. Yeah. So a related question I think from that we have in the chat is this one. I get the impression that the technology was developed to fit the learning outcomes of the course. Would you have gotten different results if the outcomes were written knowing that the technology was available beforehand?
Um,
So which one came first? Was it the learn? I guess the question is which did the technology was it developed in view of the learning outcomes or yeah.
okay. So if we are talking about the sensors, so I guess we are talking about the dashboard, right? So I guess the dashboard was informed by the learning design. So at the beginning, when the research started, we were collecting like pretty much we could collect. You know, as you just mentioned, Lisa, probably we as researchers would like to collect as many data as we like. But then with the time, we noticed that not all the data was needed. So with the lessons learned, we start checking on what would helping us to understand a bit more the learning practice. So we start checking on sensors that were not that useful, were actually very intrusive but not that useful. So we focus on the positioning data, and we are now focusing on the audio data because the conversations they are having are quite important. And this is coming, it's not that we are adapting the technology to the setting, this is coming from the actual learning design. So at the beginning of the simulation, teachers share with us the learning design. So they have some learning objectives and they are very clear learning objectives. They would like to know if they are working as a team, they would like to know how they react to certain moments in the simulation. And we use the learning design to decide which of the sensors can be used to better inform those learning outcomes or those specific pedagogical intentions that wants to be informed. So the main aim for us is to do it in a way that the learning design comes first. We learn about the learning design, and based on that, we inform which data is useful to inform that.
Thank you so much. I think that's so important. It's what we have been talking about in the course that we've been doing, like really making sure that we're not just collecting data just because it's there or that we can, but really it's because we want to find out certain things and this is aligned with the learning objectives. So the learning objectives come first, and that's the importance of the learning design and aligning the data collection around that. Thank you so much. Okay, so this other question, really interested in that point about how hard it is to visualize complex multimodal data and the importance of co-design. Is there a particular example that sticks in your mind that you can share that helped you to realize this? And how early in the process would you co-design around the visualization aspect? For instance, would that impact what devices you end up using to collect data?
Okay, so regarding the first part of the question, yes, multimodal learning analytics is complex because multimodal data is complex. And you will find when you read these MMLA papers, you will find that that's the main motivation of this research field. So we wanted to try to understand and make sense of these complex multimodal traces of data and also on how to combine them. I guess the complex part for us is always make fusion of multiple modalities. So you can have trace data and you can try to understand what this means, but then we have audio data, and if you wanted to combine, and we would like to combine them because we are hoping that that will help us to understand better the situation, and we can probably find better insights on how what was happening in terms of learning at that certain point. That's also very complex. The fusion of multimodal data, that's one of the toughest parts of the research. Now, what we are doing, and you may read a couple of papers, and not just from me but from others working on this. They are aiming to combine positioning data with speech data, trying to understand teamwork. So but in order to do this, you may need to inform what teamwork means, and you may need to inform this from the learning sciences. So that's what we normally do. So we go, there are a lot of theories in terms of teamwork and effective communication. So you may need to go and learn on what that means so that you can then start understanding your data. So if you find certain instances of good interactions, that would be something you can start with. But then we may need to inform this with the teachers and the students. Is this really informative? Do you really wanted to know what they were talking about? Why do you need this for? What is the learning objective that you would like to align in here? And I guess that's replying to the second part of the question, which is we are generating this, but it is all based on what the learning design or what's the intention of the learning activity, what is the learning outcome they would like to achieve, and all of these elements.
So I think what you said also, yeah, that's key, isn't it? It's really knowing what is the outcomes being so-called measured, and then using learning analytics to kind of achieve that purpose. So I think when Ben was asking like how early in the process would you co-design, I guess it will be like answers right from the start.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and probably it could sound scary to go into the human-centered design approach, because I just showed this timeline at the very beginning that all these years working on this. But I guess you can do prototypes quickly. Like it doesn't have to be like this long. You can go and work with, although it will need that the stakeholders are really involved in the project. So you may need to work on this relationship with them, and probably that will time will give you that. But you can also start like right away explaining that this is going to be useful for learning and teaching, and you can explain well. And if they are willing to do it, you can start co-designing with them. So you can have sessions where you and them are creating the prototypes on paper, and then doing some agile techniques. You can then create the high fidelity prototypes and test it with them, and that can probably speed up things. I know it can be like a long process, but you can find ways to do it.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another question that I think people are really curious. Like we're used to like data in the terms of numbers and things like that. So there's a question here like, how are you actually analyzing the audio data?
Okay. This is tricky. I haven't actually explored much about the audio data. But I am familiar with the research of Ling Chuan. I can share her research when we finish, and I can share all of these resources with you, Lisa.
Yes, please.
He is working on combining speech and indoor positioning data. And you know the power of large language models at the moment, and that's helping us a lot because now you can have the translations because they are, and you can have things in real time if you like. So they're wearing a microphone. Of course you need to consider the noise and other things. If you are doing this in the wild, there would be some consideration. So you can probably have the direct translation, and you can do some analysis about it. But ideally, you wanted to inform learning, so you may need to know what's the purpose of understanding their conversations. What are you looking for, where you are exploring all these conversations? Because that's the main purpose. Are they having effective conversation? Well, what an effective conversation is. What are the instances that you are looking for? I guess the analysis is going that way. It's
Yeah,
trying to find how this speech is helping me to inform what they were doing during the simulation.
yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. So, well, just to check whether anyone else in the audience has any other questions. I see Simon has helpfully dropped a link to the the teamwork analytics site. So invite everyone to check that out. And also the PhD that you were talking about, Lin Xuan Zhao. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks,
Okay.
Simon.
Does anyone have any other questions? Because I have a couple of questions of my own. Just waiting a while to see whether we have any other questions. So I think one of the things that in the course that we're doing, given that we have to get students' consent, and it's really important to make sure students are on board. So just wondering, like, say if you don't have that particular, like, you don't have some students, you have missing data from some students. What happens then? Like does that affect the viability of the analysis?
Um, we've been we have a couple of cases where we have missing data. And so for instance, we have the timeline, and the timeline is representing, we have a line for each of the students in the simulation, and we have their actions and other information there. When we have missing data, sometimes we need to remove the student that we couldn't capture that data. So of course, that students will, and we have interviewed some of them, and they were like, oh, it's a pity that we were not able to see our data because I wanted to see if I did it okay or not. So the way we're dealing with it now is we are sometimes ignoring those cases because we cannot provide a whole picture or the whole explanation of what was happening with that students because we have missing data. So we decided to remove the student from the data in some cases. But some others, we also have missing data from the trace data. So while they are walking around, we can miss couple of instances where they were moving, but we can still manage those because we have the recording of the session normally lasts 30 minutes. So we have a 30 minutes capture of raw data, of positioning data. So if we miss a couple of information, that's okay, because we still can understand where the students were moving more often or more frequently. We can have different sort of analysis. Yeah, so with the positioning data, we can sort it very easy because we have tons of data. But with speech, for instance, that would be critical. So if we don't know what they were discussing, we cannot say that they were having proper conversations or, yeah, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you've also said just before this, the fact that there's some missing data, but you have, because you are guided by the learning design, isn't it, in terms of what the students have to do. So it kind of helps to fill in a little bit of that gap. So again, that learning design is very important. Okay, now we have couple more questions. Let's see. Oh, actually, just maybe one question here. You mentioned the use of LLMs for analysis. Could you expand on how some of the traditional methods could be augmented or extended by Gen AI for MMLA?
Sure. So I've been using LLMs at the moment, not particularly for MMLA, but we are exploring something, and this is coming soon, hopefully. So we are going to be using LLMs to inform the generation of the dashboards, but particularly to understand insights from the data we have. So they are very powerful to summarize information and to understand data. And also, if you have complex visualizations, they are also very useful to reduce the complexity for someone who probably is a not common user of the dashboard, to have summaries in the way of narratives. So we have narrative explanations for the dashboards. So that's one way we are using it. We are informing the dashboard in a way that we are summarizing what the visualization is aiming to communicate by using text, because text is very easy to interpret. So we are summarizing the key insights from a visualization by using LLMs. Yeah, and we are exploring a multi-agent alternative to do that, because and you are mentioning augmenting. So we are still learning what are the best things that MMLAs, that learning large language models are doing, and we may need to complement with what humans or teachers and students are normally doing, and how can we use this LLM to augment and make them better, right? So one way to help or support their practice would be to summarize something that otherwise they will spend 10 minutes trying to understand a visualization. Maybe we can summarize in 2 lines, and that will help them to make decisions. They can intervene students, or they can do something with the data. Same for students. If they have a complex visualization that they can spend a lot of time, we are summarizing that to something which is digestible for them to take action.
Yep.
So
So,
that's the way we can augment it.
that's right. So the actionability is of that visualization is really important in terms of feedback. Yeah. So there's I think we'll make let's see a couple more questions. If you have to go, we'll make this the last question. But if you can stay, we have a couple more questions actually,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. So I think this is one of these questions is something that we do come up with. Like you have like audio data, sensor data, and all that. How do you deal with the issues of dealing with such massive amounts of data?
Years of experience. No, no, no.
How do you
Well,
manage it? Yeah.
yeah, with the time, and again, this is not an individual effort. This is a team effort. So during the PhD, I focus a lot on indoor positioning data. So we've been learning how these indoor positioning data can inform certain practice in physical spaces. For instance, a close proximity to students, to the patient, or things like that. So we have created some specific libraries that help us to use these in different settings. And we have, let's say, the script that will help us to understand how close was someone from another person. But as this is a team effort, there's others working on other modalities. So as I just mentioned, Ling Xuan is also working with speech, and he is working on a specific set of scripts and things that can be actually extracted from the data based on the speech. So this team effort is actually really helpful, because that way you can focus on certain parts of the multimodality, and then you can work together to combine them. If you are working individually, though, that can be done as well, of course, but it would be a bit more complex.
Yeah, I like how you're saying that basically it is a lot of teamwork, and what we understand from about learning analytics is like that whole interdisciplinary nature. Even within the field of like data mining, there's so many substreams,
Yeah.
and that you need that kind of team effort. But the other way, I think you have said that you know having all that data, you know that you only take that kind of data that is linked to the learning outcomes, and so that's how you really narrow down your data. Okay, do you have time for one last
Yes,
question?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so this is actually following up from what you were talking, sorry, backtrack a little bit to what you were saying about the LLMs. The question is there any concern at all about the possibility of hallucinations that still plague LLMs, and is there a way to check against these?
Oh, I have a very good and a good experience to share. Actually, this is not mine, but someone working also on MMLA told me about this. This person is using video and is prompting LLMs to generate some feedback based on the video, right? So he's asking students to make a presentation and record themselves, and the video and the LLM is prompt to generate feedback on how well this presentation was. So the experience is he was he was testing the tool, and he let us know that one day he forgot to upload the video, so the video was not there, but the LLM generate feedback anyway. So there's challenges still that we may need to face, yes, because LLMs are generate whatever they want if we are not prompting them in a right way. So again, there's space for exploration and many gaps that we may still need to explore here.
Yeah, so in answer to that, you still need to actually do that human check to see whether, in fact, whether it's the video is showing these things. I guess you would have to keep doing those manual human in the loop checkings in order to make sure that is trustworthy. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, I think that was the last of the questions. So I think, yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. It's a very interesting discussion that it has generated. I think it's really raised a lot of interesting points around its ethics and also learning design and that whole issue of data, managing data as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your experience. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation, Lisa, and
Yeah.
everyone for being part of the session today. Thanks for the
Yes.
great questions. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now for
Sure.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much again, and see